Chapter 91 Solution. The picture began to distort, blur, and disappear. Klein escaped from that dreamlike experience, and his eyes adapted to the darkness of the bedroom. He knew that it was very hard for his brother Benson to support himself and Melissa according to the standard of normal civilians with a weekly salary of £1 and 10 souls, that is, 30 souls. He thought that the weekly salary of most workers could reach 20 souls. He heard Melissa mention that in the lower street of Iron Cross Street, some families of 5, 7, or even 10 people live in the same room. He learned from Benson that in the past few months, affected by the situation in the southern continent, the kingdom experienced economic depression. He has learned that the handyman who covers food and accommodation can get 3 souls and 6 pence to 6 souls a week. Klein held out his hand, holding the eyebrows, and didn't speak for a long time until Sir Deville, who was lying in bed, said, "Officer, don't you say something? The psychologists I invited before will chat with me at this time and ask questions." However, I did feel peaceful. I almost fell asleep just now, but I didn't hear any moaning and crying. How did you do that? Klein leaned against the back of the rocking chair, didn't answer the rhetorical question, and said softly, "Sir, do you know lead poisoning? Do you know the harm of lead?" Deville, who was lying in bed, was silent for a few seconds. "I didn't know it before, but I knew it later. You mean my psychological problem or mental illness is because I feel guilty, and I feel guilty about those lead-making women workers and glazed women workers." Before Klein answered, he said, just like every time he grasped the initiative in negotiations, "Yes, I did feel guilty once, but I've already made compensation for them. In my lead white factory and porcelain factory, each worker can get a lot more salary than in the same place. In Backlander, the weekly salary of lead-making and glaze-making women workers does not exceed 8 souls, and I pay them 10 souls, or even more. Oh, many people accuse me of making them lose their morality and finding it difficult to recruit workers. If the Grain Act was not abolished, and many farmers went bankrupt and entered the city, they would have to follow me to raise their salaries. And I also told the director of the factory to let the workers who feel headaches and blurred vision leave the places where they can get in touch with lead. If they are seriously ill, they can apply for assistance from my charity fund. I think I've done enough." Klein tone spoke without any fluctuation. "Sir, sometimes you can never imagine the importance of a salary to a poor man. Even if he is unemployed for only a week or 2, his family will suffer irreversible and tragic damage." He paused, then asked, "I'm curious, why don't you add equipment to protect against dust and lead poisoning in the factory?" De Villepin looked at the ceiling and smiled. "That will make my cost too high to accept, and I can't compete with other lead factories and porcelain factories at all. I don't care too much about the benefits in this area, and I am even willing to subsidize some money, but it's always like this. What's the point? This can only help a small number of workers and cannot become the standard of the industry, driving them to make changes. This will turn into I simply spend money to support people. I heard that some factories are still secretly using slaves in order to save costs." Klein clasped his hands and was silent for a while. "Sir, your psychological problems are derived from this accumulated guilt bit by bit, although you think they have faded and disappeared. Originally, this would not have any obvious impact, but one thing stimulated you, so that all the problems were ignited at once, and all were ignited. There are things to stimulate me? I didn't know there was such a thing." Deville said doubtfully and definitely. Klein let the body gently shake with the rocking chair, and the tone gently explained, "You actually fell asleep for a few minutes just now and told me one thing. Hypnotherapy?" Deville habitually guesses and draws conclusions that Klein didn't make a positive reply, directly said, "You once saw a female worker who died on the way to work in a carriage. She died of lead poisoning and was glazing her porcelain before her death." Deville rubbed his temples on both sides and whispered uncertainly, "There seems to be such a thing, but I don't remember it clearly. Long-term insomnia has made his mental state very poor, and it seems that he really saw a similar scene. He wanted to think, no longer squeezing his poor brain, but asked, 'What's the woman worker's name?' Well, I mean, what should I do to treat my psychological problems?" Klein Low succinctly answer, 2 things. First, The woman worker who died on the side of the road is Harriet Walker. This is what you told me. She is the most direct stimulus, so you need to find her parents and give more compensation. Second, widely publicize the harm of lead in newspapers and magazines so that your charity fund can help the injured workers more. If you can become a member of the upper house, then promote legislation in this regard. DeVille sat up slowly and smiled wryly. I will do other things, but legislation... Oh, I don't think it is possible because there are still foreign competitors. Legislation will only make these industries in the kingdom fall into an overall crisis, one after another go bankrupt, and a large number of workers will lose their jobs. Poor organizations can't save so many people. He turned off the bed with displeasure, cut his neckline, and looked at Klein's way. Haley Leaf. Walker, right? I will immediately ask Karen to go to the porcelain factory to get her information and ask her parents to come over. Officer, please wait with me and evaluate my mental state at all times. Okay. Klein stood up slowly and took a picture of the black and white uniform. At 11 o'clock in the morning, the living room on the first floor of the DeVille family, Klein, who hasn't talked much, sat on the single-person sofa and watched in silence as a man and a woman were let in by the housekeeper Karen. The two guests have rough skin. Wrinkles have begun to appear on their faces. The men's back is slightly rickety, and the women have a mole on their eyelids. They are basically consistent with what Klein saw through Haley Leaf, but they are older and haggard, so thin that they can almost see the bones, and they are dressed in old and tattered clothes. It is said that even Iron Cross Street can hardly live down the street. Woo, in Klein's inspiration, the cold wind began to swirl. He pinched the eyebrows, turned to Sir DeVille, and saw a plain, transparent, and twisted figure emerge behind each other. Good morning, dear Sir Alex Ferguson. Harriet's parents saluted with unusual formality. DeVille rubbed his forehead and asked, You are Harriet Walker's parents? Doesn't she have a brother and a 2-year-old sister? Harriet's mother replied fearfully, Her brother, broke his leg at the pier some time ago, and we asked him to take care of his sister at home. DeVille was silent for a few seconds, sigh away. I deeply sympathize with Harriet's misfortune. Hearing these words, Haley's father and mother were all red in the eye immediately, and each spoke, cluttered way. Thank you for your kindness. The police told us that Haley died of lead poisoning, should be the word? Oh, my poor child. She is only 17 years old. She has always been quiet and stubborn. You sent someone to see her and funded the burial. She was buried in Raphael Cemetery. At Klein, DeVille changed his sitting posture, leaned forward, and said with a heavy tone, This is actually our negligence, and I need to apologize. I've thought about it. I have to make it up to you. I have to make it up to Haley. Her weekly salary is 10 sela, right? A year is 540 souls. Well, 27 pounds, and we assume that she can still work for at least 10 years. Karen, you take 300 pounds to Harriet's parents. 300 pounds? Harriet's father and mother were stunned. When they were most affluent, their savings on hand did not exceed 1 pound. Not only them, but also the bodyguards and servants in the living room are shocked and envious. Even the police chief Gator can't help but make his breathing heavier. His weekly salary is only 2 pounds, while his only V police officer is only 1 pound. In an indescribable silence, Karen, the housekeeper, came out of the study with a bulging cloth bag in her hand. He hit the cloth bag and revealed stacks of banknotes inside, including 1 pound and 5 pounds. But more were 1 soul and 5 soul. It can be seen that DeVille made people get change from the bank in advance. This is the Jazz's mind. Karen, who got the owner's approval, handed the bag to Harriet's parents. Harriet's father and mother took it, rubbed their eyes, and watched it over and over again. No, it's too generous. We shouldn't accept it. They clung to the cloth bag road. DeVille sink a track. This is what Harriet should get. You are really a noble and kind knight. Harriet's parents bowed excitedly again and again. There was a smile on their faces, an irresistible smile. They praised Sir DeVille over and over again. They said those few adjectives over and over again. They repeatedly said that Harriet would definitely be grateful to each other in heaven. Karen, send someone to take them back. Well, to the bank first. DeVille was relieved and told the housekeeper. Harriet's father and mother clung to the cloth bag and hurried to the door without stopping. Klein saw that the plain and transparent figure behind Sir DeVille tried to reach out to them and try to follow them away, but they smiled brilliantly and didn't look back. The figure faded away and soon disappeared completely. In Klein's induction, the coldness of the living room is normal. He just watched quietly from beginning to end without making any comments. Officer, I feel much better. Can you tell me now why my housekeeper, servants, and bodyguards can also hear crying and moaning? Shouldn't this be just a psychological problem that belongs to me? DeVille looked up curiously. Inspector Toller, who knew the inside story, suddenly became nervous. Klein replied with no facial expression. In psychology, we call this phenomenon mass hysteria. P.S. The archetypes of several female workers in the previous chapter are based on Jack London's The Abyss Residence view of the East End of London. Chapter 92, Psychologists, Mass Hysteria. Sir DeVille, who has been in contact with many psychologists during this time, chewed the nouns given by Klein. His housekeeper, his bodyguard, and his servant didn't make a sound without his permission, even if they were curious. Is the sheriff gate? A confused look at Klein. A pair of never heard of a similar concept. Klein controlled the inertia of tapping the sofa armrest with his fingers and explained in a low voice. Human beings are very easily deceived by their own senses and mass. Hysteria is a psychological problem caused by the mutual influence of mental stress and other factors in the same group. His series of professional words were confused by Sir DeVille, Sheriff Gator, and others, and he subconsciously chose to believe them. Let me give you a simple example. This is a case I have handled. A gentleman held a dinner party and invited 35 guests. At the dinner party, he suddenly felt sick and vomited on the spot, and then he was accompanied by severe diarrhea. Once, twice, and 3 times he began to think that he was food poisoning. While going to the hospital, he told his guests this guess. In the next 2 hours, more than 30 of the 35 guests had diarrhea and 26 vomited. They crowded the emergency room of the hospital. The doctors made a detailed examination and comparison and thought that the original gentleman was not poisoned because of the gastrointestinal inflammation caused by the weather change and cold spirits. The most surprising thing is that none of the guests who came to the hospital were poisoned, and none of them were really sick. This is mass hysteria. DeVille slightly and commended. I see, human beings are really easy to deceive themselves. No wonder Emperor Russell said that a lie repeated 100 times will become the truth. Officer, what should I call you? You are the most professional psychologist I have ever seen. Inspector Moridi. Klein pointed to his epaulets. Sir, your troubles have been preliminarily solved. You can try to sleep now. Let me confirm whether there are any other problems. If you can have a good dream, please allow us to leave early and not wait for you to wake up. Okay. DeVille rubbed his forehead, took his cane, went upstairs step by step, and entered the bedroom. Half an hour later, the carriage with the police coat of arms left the fountain at Lord DeVille's door. Wait until the Sheriff Gator got off halfway and returned to the police station. Inspector Toller only looked at Klein, half complimenting and half jokingly saying, I just thought you were a real psychologist. His words didn't say that finish, because he saw the young man wearing a white uniform on a black background almost didn't show any expression. His eyes were dark and deep, and his mouth barely pulled up. I've only been exposed to some before. Inspector Toller quieted down until the carriage stopped outside 36 Zotland Street. Thanks to your help, Sir Jean DeVille finally got rid of his troubles and got back to sleep. He reached out and shook Klein's hand. Say thank you to done for me. Klein gently nods. Okay. He stepped on the stairs, step by step back to Blackthorn Security Company, knocked at the door, and entered the captain's office. Solved. Dunn is waiting for his own lunch. Solved. Klein rubbed his forehead and said concisely, the root of the problem lies in the lead-making and porcelain factories under Sir DeVille's name. Since their establishment, there have been too many lead poisoning deaths, and every incident will harvest a little resentment from Sir Jean DeVille. Normally, these will not bring big problems, and people will have nightmares at most. Dunn has handled similar cases and has quite rich experience. Klein slightly, a moment, and said, "Yes, things should have gone this way, but unfortunately, Sir DeVille met a female worker with lead poisoning in the street one day. She just fell down on the side of the road and happened to see the arms of the DeVille family. At the same time, she still had a strong sense of unwillingness, anxiety, and longing, and these feelings didn't dissipate until Sir gave her parents, brothers, and sisters a compensation of £300. This is a social problem, which is not uncommon in this era of steam and machinery." Dunn took out his pipe, sniffed at it, and sighed and said, "Workers who make flax generally suffer from bronchitis and joint diseases because they wet materials and themselves." Forgot. Chapter 97. Fighting teacher. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, on the outskirts of the Northern District, outside a 2-story house with a quaint style and disrepaired, Klein, a trainee inspector in police uniform, looked at the overgrown garden and climbed the wall with many plants, and he was slightly shocked to say, "My fighting teacher lives here?" A fighter who can be picked by the night watchman squad must be excellent. Led him to come over. Leonard Mitchell low smile a track. Don't despise Mr. Gawain because of his living environment. Although he didn't get the title in the end, he was once a real knight. Speaking of which, the poet who casually wears a white shirt, black trousers, and buttonless boots is suddenly full of sadness. He was active in the knight's last glory days. Those warriors wearing breastplates charged wildly at the muskets and cannons arranged in arrays, destroying their opponents and flattening the front line. Unfortunately, they soon ushered in the invention and installation of high-pressure steam rifles and 6-barrel machine guns. Since then, the knights have gradually withdrawn from the stage. The same is true of Mr. Gawain. More than 20 years ago, the knights of Joniaho, where he belongs, encountered the army with the most advanced weapons in the Republic of India. Alas, whenever I think about this, I feel as if I have touched the dust of history and been shocked by the irreversible vicissitudes and fate. There are poems brewing and surging in my heart. However, I can't write poems. Then why do you say so much? Klein pretended not to recognize Leonard's self-mockery and seriously suggested, "My college classmates told me that writing poetry is a very talented thing, and it is best to start by reading the collection of early classical poems and songs of rune." Leonard's mood is changeable, easily and happily interface. I have already bought this collection of poems, and there are books such as Selected Poems of Roselle. I will try my best to become a midnight poet, Mr. Diviner. Is this a hint of acting? Klein, as if what also don't understand, to answer. Then you need books on grammar. Okay, let's go in. Leonard stretched out his hand and pushed open the half-closed iron gate and walked along the road for 2 people to parallel to the house. Before approaching, Klein saw the front door open and a tall man came out of the room. His blonde hair is very short, his temples have turned white, and the skin on his face has traces of wind and frost infection, while the wrinkles on his head, crow's feet, and decrees are profound and obvious. "What are you doing here?" the middle-aged and old man asked with a heavy voice. "Mr. Gawain, according to the contract you signed with the police department, our trainee inspector will learn fighting with you." Leonard explained with a smile. "Fighting? There is no need to learn fighting in the present era." Gawain looked at Klein with slightly cloudy eyes and said lifelessly, "You should practice drawing and shooting and master the most advanced weapons." Is this a psychological shadow caused by 6 machine guns and high-pressure steam rifles? Klein didn't respond rashly and looked at Leonard with a funny side. For the police, fighting is still a subject that must be mastered. Most of the criminals we face are not demons that must be executed immediately. They don't even have weapons. At this time, fighting skills are needed. Leonard spoke as if he were ready, Gawain face, silent for more than 10 seconds. "You try to punch." He said it to Klein. Klein, who didn't take a cane, recalled the boxing match he had seen in his last life, raised his arm and waved forward. Gawain, corners of the mouth slightly invisible to smoke for a moment, wanted to think. Kick. Half of the body, shaking the crotch, Klein tightened his thigh and pulled out his right foot. Cough. Gawain put his hand against his mouth, coughed twice, and looked at Leonard. "I will abide by the contract, but in his case, he only needs to come 4 times a week for 3 hours at a time. You are a fighting expert, you decide. Leonard nodded without hesitation and smiled at Klein. See you at dinner. Wait until he walked out of the grating gate. Klein, just curious, and asked, Teacher, where should I start practicing? Punch or step? As a qualified keyboard player, he knows that the pace of fighting is also very important. Gawain's hands hung down on his sides, and his lethargy shook his head heavily. What you need most now is strength practice. See there? There are 2 iron dumbbells, and they're your companions today. Besides, you need to practice squats, running, and skipping rope. Let's do it in groups. Klein becomes speechless, his voice suddenly sore. Majesty asked, Do you understand? I see. At this moment, Klein felt that he had returned to military training, facing an inhuman instructor. Go and change your clothes first. There is a knight's training suit on the sofa. Gawain suddenly sighed, turned his back, and walked towards the iron-black dumbbells. At 6 o'clock in the evening, the corner of the Old Weil restaurant, except Fry, who is rotating at Cheney's gate. All the members of Blackthorn Security Company are here, including 6 night watchmen and 5 civilian staff. The white tablecloth is quietly spread on the long table, and the waiters come with plates of food. They cut it first and then send it to each guest separately. Klein saw the steak with black pepper sauce, bacon, sausage with mashed potatoes, custard, aloe vera, special cheese, and amber champagne. However, he had no appetite, and the afternoon training almost made him vomit. Glancing at the new night watchman with pale eyes and distracted eyes, Dunn picked up the glass of red wine in front of him and smiled and said, Let's welcome the new official member, Klein Maridi. Cheers. Loyo Latang, a cold and reserved brunette, Carrie White, a short and pithy sleepless, Leonard Mitchell, an untidy man, and Siga Tian, a midnight poet with white hair and curome, all raised their glasses and looked at the new teammates. Klein endured the residual discomfort of training, served the amber champagne, stood up and said, Thank you. He clinked glasses with each night watchman one by one, and looked up and drank the little champagne. At this time, doesn't our writer miss say something? Dunn smiled and looked at Siga Tian. Siga Tian is a lady in her 30s. Her appearance is quite ordinary, but her temperament is very outstanding. She is quiet and peaceful, and her rare long white hair has quite a unique charm. Klein heard old Neil mention that this midnight poet is an amateur novel lover and tried to contribute to newspapers and magazines, but unfortunately only a few tabloids pass. Sega smiled and saw Dunn's way. In order to make what you call Miss Writer a reality, Captain, I think you should grant me a special fee so that I can pay for the novel myself. Dunn's hand laughed. You should learn from old Neil and find a more suitable reason. In this respect, I admire Mr. Neil most. Luo Shan swallowed a roast leg of lamb and shouted and chimed in. Between the people talking and laughing, Leonard looked at Klein, light say with smile. Too tired, no appetite, can't eat? Yes. Klein sighed. If you haven't touched it yet, then I can help. Leonard looks like he doesn't waste food. Klein also don't mind to nod away. No problem. In this way, most of the food in front of him was eaten by Leonard and others at the end of dinner. The waiter served beef pudding and ice cream. Klein tasted the latter, only cold and sweet, especially appetizing. Unconsciously, he finished his share of ice cream with blueberry juice. It is precisely because of this that he began to feel the hunger of scratching his heart and stomach, which is the desire of his body to be replenished after a lot of consumption. Swallowing saliva, Klein looked at the front and saw that the plates were in a mess and there was almost no left. Let's stop here. Let's drink to Klein one last time. At this time, Dunn suggested. His voice did not fall. Klein blurted out, Captain, can I have another dinner? Hearing this request, there was a silence, and then they laughed quietly. Haha, you finally recovered, no problem. 2 more copies will do. Dunn shook his head and laughed, anxious and unbearable waiting. Klein heard the chirping of his stomach. Finally, a freshly fried steak with black pepper sauce was served. Knife and fork danced, and Klein almost shed tears. It took only a minute and a half to get rid of the medium-cooked food, and there was a smell of meat and juice in his mouth that I don't know how long it took. Looking at the empty plates, he heaved a sigh of satisfaction, put down his knife and fork and took a sip of champagne. "Waiter, check out." Dunn turned to the waiter next to him. The waiter first went to the front desk and then returned with a bill, explaining in detail. "You have opened 5 bottles of Dixie champagne. Each bottle is 12 Soul 3 pence. A small glass of Southwell red wine is 10 pence. 1 Soul 2 pence for steak with black pepper sauce. 6 pence for beef pudding and 1 Soul for ice cream. The total is £5 9 Soul 6 pence. £5 9 Souls 6 pence? Almost ate my salary for a week. Restaurants are much more expensive than eating at home." Klein heard a staggering, very glad that the captain said that he didn't have to treat himself, that there was a small vault and extra funds. After careful calculation, he found that the most expensive part of dinner was drinks, and only 5 bottles of champagne were over £3. It's no different from the earth. Klein quietly touched his stomach and forced himself to finish the last sip of champagne. In the early morning of the next day, Klein vaguely felt the fullness in his lower abdomen and turned over to get up. As soon as he exerted his strength, he was completely awake by the pain of his muscles, only to feel that his body did not belong to him at all. It's a familiar feeling, just like the day after being punished for leapfrog. Today's rest day, I have to visit my tutor to see if I can borrow the academic monograph of Hornachi's main peak from the university library. Klein twitched at the corner of his mouth and struggled to move outside. Every step, he wants to take a breath. "Klein, what's wrong with you?" Melissa, who just came out of the bathroom, looked at her brother with strange posture and slow movements in disbelief. Chapter 98. Mr. Ask in the face of sister's problem. Klein can only wry smile away. Muscle aches. He thought that he would improve his physical fitness more or less by taking the sequential magic potion, but the cruel facts told him that the skills of soothsayer were all based on spirituality, spirit, intuition, and interpretation, which could not make him adapt to fighting training quickly. However, the former owner has been concentrating on reading for many years and has some malnutrition, which has kept his physical fitness at a lower middle level. Today, such sequelae can only be said to be quite normal. Muscle aches? I remember you came back after dinner last night and didn't do anything else. Does alcohol make your muscles ache? Melissa inquired with great spirit of exploration. Alcohol can make people muscle ache. Sister, you ask the sentence. It's really embarrassing to ask. Klein's 2 quick tracks. No, it has nothing to do with alcohol. It was yesterday afternoon. I joined the company's fighting training. Fighting. Melissa was even more surprised at Klein's quickly organized language way. Well, I think, as a history and cultural relics consultant of a security company, I can't stay in the office forever and stay in the dock warehouse. Maybe one day in the future, I need to go to the countryside with them, go to the castle, and get the original place of cultural relics. I will climb mountains, cross rivers, walk many, many roads, and accept various tests of nature on the way, which requires me to have a healthy body. So you join fighting training to improve your physique? Melissa understood what her brother meant. Yes. Klein gave a positive answer. Melissa frowned slightly way. But it's not a gentleman. Haven't you been demanding yourself by the standards of professors? Professors only need to read the literature, consider difficult problems, and be gentle and graceful. Of course, I'm not saying it's not good. I like men who can solve problems by themselves, whether they use muscles or brains. Klein smiled and said, No, Melissa. There is a certain misunderstanding in your definition of a professor. A real professor can communicate with people politely and gently, or he can lift his cane and convince each other physically when there are obstacles in communication. Physical way. Melissa didn't respond, but she soon understood what her brother wanted to express, and she couldn't find a language to refute it at the moment. Klein didn't say anything more. He struggled to move his legs and moved to the bathroom. Melissa stood there, watching for a few seconds, suddenly shook her head, 2 steps to catch up. Can I help you? She gave a gesture of helping. No, I don't need it. I just had some acting elements. Klein felt insulted, suddenly straightened his back and stepped normally. Watching my brother walk steadily into the bathroom and shut the door, Melissa pursed the lips and muttered in a low voice, Klein is getting more and more grandiose. I thought his muscle ache was really that serious. In the bathroom, Klein stood behind the closed door, his face suddenly twisted. Pain, pain, pain. He held his breath and tightened his body for 7 or 8 seconds. It was not until he went downstairs hard, finished breakfast, and watched Benson and Melissa go out that he felt the pain was no longer so deadly. After a rest, Klein took his cane, put on his hat, and walked slowly out of the door to the station of the rail bus. In the summer vacation, Hoi University is shaded by trees, full of flowers and birds, peaceful and quiet. After walking along the river for a while, Klein turned into the road leading to the history department, found the 3-story gray stone building that had been around for some years, and found the office of his tutor Cohen Quinton. He knocked at the door and was surprised to see Ask, a teacher, sitting in the tutor's position. "Good morning, Mr. Ask. Where is my tutor? We agreed to meet at 10 o'clock in the letter." Klein asked doubtfully. Cohen Quinton's good friend, Ask, a teacher who often disputes with him because of academic problems, laughed. Cohen had a temporary meeting and went to Tingen University. "Let me wait for you here." His skin is bronzed, he is of medium height, with dark hair and brown eyes, and his facial features are soft. There is always an indescribable sense of vicissitudes in his eyes, and there is a small mole hidden under his right ear that cannot be found without careful look. "Say that Finnish reason," Ask abrupt frowned, carefully looked at Klein. "Is there anything rude about me?" Klein blankly looked up his dress. Tuxedo, black vest, white shirt, black bow tie, dark trousers, leather boots without buttons. "It's normal," Az Graham's stretch eyebrow eye haha laughs. "Don't care. I just suddenly found that you are much more energetic than before and more like a gentleman." "Thank you for your compliment." Klein accepted it frankly and asked instead, "Mr. Ask, did the tutor find the book, Study on the Ancient Relics of the Main Peak of Hinachis, in the school library?" "Yes, with my help." Ask smiled softly and said, then opened the drawer and took out a book with a gray cover. "You are no longer a student at Hoi University. You can only read it here, but you can't take it away."
Oh, cool.
Klein accepted the academic monograph with implicit fear and joy. The appearance design of this book completely conforms to the current fashion trend. The cover and back cover are made of hard paper, and the pattern is a picture, which makes up the abstract appearance of the main peak of Hornachis. Klein took a glance, found a place to sit down, opened the book and read it carefully line by line. He was fascinated by it when he suddenly found that there was an extra cup of coffee at hand, which was mellow and rich in fragrance. "Add sugar and milk yourself." Ask put down the small silver plate and pointed to the milk jar and sugar cube box. "Thank you." Klein nodded gratefully. He casually added 3 cubes of sugar and a spoonful of milk, and went on reading without knowing what to eat. The book, Research on the Ancient Relics of Hornachi's Main Peak, is not thick. Near noon, Klein finished reading it and grasped several points that need attention. First, the biological settlements in the main peak of Hornachis and its surrounding areas have obviously formed a civilization, and there is an ancient country. Second, from the perspective of murals, their appearance is no different from that of human beings, and they can be regarded as human beings initially. Third, they revere and fear the night, and thus personify a god to believe, calling this god the Master of the Night and the Mother of Heaven. Fourth, the strangest thing is that no tombs in this country have been found in the whole area, giving people a strange illusion that their residents don't need to be buried, or even may not die, which contradicts the content of the mural. In the mural, the people of this country believe that death is not the end, and that their dead relatives will protect themselves in the dark, so they will leave their dead relatives at home, stay in bed, and stay at the bedside for 3 years. After that, the murals stop here and don't involve the buried part. Klein took a sip of coffee and continued to write after reading in his notebook. Mother of Heaven is a very tall name, and the Master of the Night obviously overlaps with the Goddess of the Night. Is this the root of the contradiction? In the ancient ruins of the main peak of Honachis and the surrounding area, all the displays and decorations are well preserved, and the murals have no traces of damage. Before being discovered, it seems that there is no disturbance here. There are plates on the table, and there are traces of dry rot in the plates. In some rooms, there are half a bottle of wine that almost becomes clear water. The people of this country? They all seem to have left their homes in a hurry, without packing anything, and then they never returned. It is even more strange to think that there is no tomb. The author, Mr. Joseph, also said that when these relics were first discovered, he even thought that their residence here had evaporated in an instant. Klein stopped his pen and turned his attention to an illustration. It was a black-and-white photo taken by John Joseph with a new camera on his third trip to the main peak of Honokis. In the photo, the palace is towering, the walls are collapsed, the weeds are overgrown, and the style is mainly grand. Just turn to this photo. Klein instantly remembered the palace he saw in his dream. The styles of the two tend to be the same, but the seat I dreamed of was more magnificent at the summit. And there was a huge seat that did not belong to human beings at the top, with countless transparent maggots huddled together and crawled slowly. It can be confirmed that my dream has something to do with the ancient ruins of the main peak of Honokis. That should be the country of Night mentioned in the notes of the Antigonus family. Klein nodded invisibly and closed the books. This time, Ask sat opposite him and touched the humble mole below the right ear. How about it? Have you gained anything? There are quite a few. You see, I took many pages of notes. Klein pointed to the desktop and laughed. I don't understand why you are suddenly interested in this matter. Ask sighed casually and then said, Klein, when I was in college in Backlander, I came into contact with some divination things, and I did some research on this. Well, I found that your fate is not harmonious. What? Divination? Talk to me about divination? As a soothsayer, Klein funnily looked at the opposite Ask teacher's way. What's the inconsistency? AZ Grams wanted to think. Have you often met coincidences in the last 2 months? Coincidence. Because of Mr. Ask's kindness, Klein didn't resist each other's questions and subconsciously began to recall. If you really want to say coincidence, the most obvious thing is that when chasing the kidnappers, they found clues to the notes of the Antigonus family that had been missing for several days across the room where they were hiding. Also, Riel Bieber hurried to find a place to digest the power given by the notes before he escaped from Tingen, so that the seal 2-049 could easily trace his whereabouts, which was somewhat counterintuitive. Although Mr. Al-Hassan explained it well, I always felt a little coincidental. Well, after reading Heiners Vincent's secret mantra, Selena didn't try it until the birthday dinner, which happened to be discovered by me, and it was a little coincidence. Otherwise, Heiners Vincent wouldn't have died suddenly like that. Klein seriously thought for a few minutes. There are 3, not too many, not too often, and there are no traces of interference and guidance from others. AZG gently, a moment to say. Emperor Russell said that a coincidence that is only once will happen to anyone, and twice belongs to the normal category. After 3 times, we must think about what internal factors are guiding us. Can you see anything? Klein asked tentatively. AZG smiled and shook his head to answer. I can only see a little incongruity, and I can't find anything else. You know, I'm not a real soothsayer. That's not to say is equal to didn't say it. Mr. Ask is a little strange. In front of me this Diablo 3. Klein spit out a sigh, while the other party got up, pinched his eyebrows, and opened the second sight. At first glance, Ask's aura is all reflected in his eyes, and everything is normal. It's a pity that I can only see the depths of others' etheric body and the surface of spirit body above the fog. Klein tapped the eyebrows, stood up, and thought leisurely. Chapter 99 Red Chimney in the afternoon. Klein, who came home, drew the curtains and left the bedroom in darkness. He dug out a pen and paper, thought for a long time, and finally wrote a passage. Elliot's kidnapping case is guided by extraordinary factors. As a soothsayer, Klein has actually divined whether there are unnatural developments in those things that feel coincidental before, and it turns out that he thinks too much this time. Influenced by Ask's teacher, he paid attention to this problem again, and absorbed the lessons of the clown in the tuxedo, and carefully designed the divination sentence to exclude some vague and confusing descriptions from the beginning. Well, break down the 3 coincidences and make their own divination. Klein nodded thoughtfully and slowly untied the topaz pendant from the cuff. He held the pendulum with his left hand and let the pendant hang over the divination sentence on the paper, almost touching Convergent's mind. Into meditation, Klein closed his eyes and began to repeat meditation. Elliot's kidnapping case is guided by extraordinary factors. Over and over again, he opened his eyes and looked at the pendulum, only to see the topaz pendant rotating slightly counterclockwise. Or no. Klein whispered and redesigned the divination sentence several times, but the result was still that there was no coincidence. He also divined Ril Bieber's detention in Tingen and Selena's magic mirror divination respectively, and the answers were normal, da. As a real diviner, I was fooled by Mr. Ask, a fake god stick? Besides, Captain, they didn't feel weird. Klein shook his head funny, but he was still cautious and ready to make a final confirmation with dream divination. After thinking for a moment, he changed the divination sentence to adapt to different methods, the real cause of Elliot's kidnapping.